even back then?
James always had a
Yeah.
big personality that
Yeah.
I can remember. Here's one I can envision. We're playing like a party picnic, and they have a big bonfire. Well, of course, there's a lot of beer and different things around. And he's got this guitar that's not even his, it's some buddy that gave him. He started singing a Stanley Brothers tune, Lord knows what it was. He got too into it, and he stepped forward, and he stepped up into the burning pit. And he's singing away, and somebody grabbed him like that, and he kept right on going. Next thing you know, he's always a big guy. Until this day, and it was like, somebody said, well, get him, this guy on the guitar. I said, oh, the heck with him, get my guitar. Till this day, that's the funniest thing I've ever seen. These old Converse sneakers.
How old was he about then?
He was in the service, I think early 20s, or late teens, early 20s, yeah. I think James was just a year older or two than me. When was James born? 58, I was 59. So, yeah, so we're all about that same age. And I always said, and Kevin will back this up, James had this personality. You loved him as soon as he opened his mouth. He'd look at you with these big old innocent eyes. You just look at him and go, I like that dude. And that's the way everybody treated him. And look at this turnout today. Kevin, you were with him a long time.
Yes, sir. Now be careful.
Can everybody hear back there?
Well, I was privileged and honored to start, I started my long journey with James on December the 11th, 1997. And we played a bar that was about an eighth of the size of this room. Probably as long as 2 school buses put together. It's called Uncle Walt's place, and Danny knows exactly where it's at, right down in the heart of Baltimore. And that was my tryout, and I'll never forget it. We got in there and we got hemmed up in a corner, and we went into the first chorus on the song of Just a Few Old Memories. And I was singing tenor absolutely to the top of my lungs, where you couldn't hear not one dang word I was singing, because everybody in that bar was singing every word with James. James looked over at me and said, "Hey, well, forget it tonight, Prater. I'm going to listen to you tomorrow. I can't hear nothing." So we went up to Harvey Jr.'s place the next night, where I learned about getting 2 sloppy Joe sandwiches and $100 for 5 cents.
Oh, that much?
Well, we played the first set of music, and James took Jason Moore and Adam Poindexter in the back room where they had all the stock of beer and everything. And James said, "We gotta go back here and have a meeting." Said, "I think I'm gonna give it a try." So they come back out, and James said, "Job's yours. And you done a good job driving us up here." So 2 weeks pass, and we get ready to go into Christmas, and my Christmas present to James was, I've been talking to Ken. Ken thinks he's gonna put you on the Bed by the Window record with us. Like Ken said, "I'm gonna send you stuff." Said, "You got about 4 weeks to learn this." So I started practicing to get ready to go in and cut the first album with James, and they had the majority of the stuff laid down. So by the time we come to Spigma in '98, February, we went in on the Monday after Spigma with Steve was the engineer, and Ken was producing, and I got to play on James' Bed by the Window album and sing, and of course that album really being pretty much what set his tone for his career. I mean, that song changed everything for him. So basically from that point on, I got to see some of the greatest times of my life ever. We wound up playing together in 49 states and 23 countries. And I can never say how much I appreciated the opportunities to work with James and, of course, Steve and Ken. I learned so much in that valuable time, but like Danny said, I mean, I could share story after story, and I've got one little funny thing I will share. I will say this, on a musical note, James King was by far the greatest lead singer I ever sung with, hands down. I never seen no one that could ever wrap up so much emotion in a song. Me and Steve shared just a little memory area, and I know Ken remembers this. The last two songs we recorded on the Bed by the Window record was Sweeter Than the Flowers, and then we come back and redone a cut on Where the Red Rose. And Owen Saunders got to come in and play on those two cuts with us, and the rest of the album, of course, featured Bobby Hicks on the fiddle. We come in, and the day we laid down the vocals for Sweeter Than the Flowers, we get to the verse in that song, and I know where James got it from. I mean, James was a die-hard Carter Stanley fan. I mean, if there was a line that Carter ever sung, he could sing it, and sing it very well, always. But when James sung the line, "Oh, Mama, when I passed by your coffin," I mean, he trembled that voice, and you could see him getting ready to cry. You could see it, and it was coming up as soon as he said, "Oh, Mama, when I passed by your coffin," and Steve right back in the church said, "There's the death shot right there." Come on, kill a bucket. And Ken was sitting over, and I could hear Ken say, "Too much Carter." And James, immediately James said, "We gotta leave it in there. That's the way Carter done it." So that's the very way it come on the record, and you can just hear it. But I tell you what, he could, and there's so many of those stories. But you know, I have to echo what Danny said. He was pure country boy. One spoken word to him, and you loved it from the second you ever saw him. And he always had you in the palm of his hand. I never seen no one that could get a whole crowd in the palm of their hands the way James King could do it. And he definitely was a storyteller. I'll share one little funny thing here with you about him. We was in Georgia, and Jason Moore was still playing in the band with us. And I'll never forget, we was at a festival down there, and the ground, and you're gonna love this, Tom. The ground was divoted all over the place, and the places just, I don't know if they'd had like cattle or horses or something out there where they just had flipped towards the ground up. Well, James was walking through, and he stepped down in one of these holes, and he crilled his ankle. And I mean, he went down. And of course, he laid there on the ground. I mean, you know, first thing I pictured in my mind, I told Jake, I said, "Well, so we want to get him up." I said, "You know, do something with him." He laid there for a bit, and I reached down. I said, "Here, buddy, you want me to help you pick up?" I can get up. He got up. He looked around for a minute, he looked, and then he pointed straight down at the ground. I'll never forget this stupid hole. And Jason looked at him and said, "Did that ground speak to you?" But it's James, you know, and it's like, you know, I'm telling you what I think about this. You know, stupid hole. So all day long, we walked around that place, and every time anybody stepped in anything, Jake said, "Stupid hole right there." So we carried that with us. But there's too many of them, and everybody in this room that knew him has got at least 1 or 1,000 of them going in their head. Some better than others. But I loved him. I truly loved him. I always will. His music will live on forever. And I can say so much about him, but all I can say is thank God for that man coming in my life, because I wouldn't be getting to do anything that I'm doing today if it wasn't for him. And I owe so much to James King, and I love him. I love his music, and I'm glad that I got to be a part of a 11.5-year journey, and blessed to be a part of some of the greatest recordings that he ever made. I truly was a part of all that magic, and I owe all that to him for believing in me.
That's great. Well, Steve, do you remember your early days of working with him?
Well,
because you wouldn't probably. Did you know him before?
Well,
you
here's
first met him?
exactly, yeah. In fact, you and Hazel Dickens introduced me to James at Owensboro a little over 25 years ago, about 26 years ago at the IBMA. And we went into the trade show, and we were listening. You wanted me to hear some material, and then you wanted me to meet this gentleman, James King. And anyway, we went in there, and immediately, like you said, as soon as you meet him, you know him. You know, it's one of those type of things where James was just, he would just, you know, his personality was like somebody you've known for a long time. He came on that way. And then, as soon as we started listening to material and set up the first session, you know, I knew where this was going, because this person would come into the studio and put his heart into a song. He'd know what the song's about. You know, a lot of singers will come in and put the paper there and read it, you know, and record that way. But James, he would digest the whole thing. He would know what the song's all about. And Ken and I, many times, come on, James, you get through this. You get through this. He would get so emotional. Bed by the window. We had. Well, the track went down pretty quick because he set. First of all, he'd set the emotion for the track, you know, and the band, you know, a band plays off of the singer. You know, if you're going down live, that's part of the magic of the city records. And I still try to look at that nowadays. But the records like that, you know, we would go in the whole band and do the whole thing live, and James would get to a verse or something, and he would just struggle through it because he'd be thinking about it. He'd be living that character.
It's something that normally
Right.
you strive for. So
Yeah.
few artists
We had to
do
have
that,
asked for it.
and you always want the artist
Right.
to feel and to make the audience, whoever it is, whether on record or at a show, feel some of what he's feeling.
And he
But
did-
James like was so into it
He
that
did that on stage live.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
he become that character that he's singing about, and you know, like Echo Mountain was a good example.
Yes.
I mean, he had me crying up in there.
When they shot the dog like that, I mean,
Oh.
he picked them papers up off that music stand in there, and he looked at Steve, looked at us, and he said, God!
We never did Knoxville Girl, did we?
No, that'd been the longest
Oh,
ride
yeah.
back to Knoxville, I guarantee.
Yeah, but anyway, he'd deliver that emotion, and that magic would be there in the track, and then we'd go back and try to do it again. And James, a lot of people when they overdub that, they never get that emotion. Every single time we get to a certain verse, man, that quiver.
Well, that's-
would come in, and we'd get to it, and it's on the records. You know,
You can hear it, that's, and so many of the songs, I
Yeah.
mean, he mentioned like Echo Mountain, I remember when we cut that CD, we went in, and the band, I have to say, that time, we was very well rehearsed for that project. Ken even said, I mean, we laid every track down on that project in 2 days. Everything was done, and the only thing was left, James was working on vocals, and we was working on final vocals and things like that. So Ken was very, very pleased with all of us. I done the rhythm guitar playing on that project first, and we laid everything down. Basically had most of our tracks down in a day. And we come back, done some overdubs, and then when we got ready for vocals, and then that's when it all started. You can see all the emotion. I mean, he has read things on that project. I mean, just like when we done cut Saginaw, Michigan, when, we were sitting out there on the couch and me and him was talking. He said, basically that boy was a crook. He sold him nothing. And I looked at him, and God forgive me for saying, I looked at him, I said, you ought to be familiar with that. I said, he looked at me and he said, what are you saying? I said,
And I think, I feel Lefty and some of that.
Oh, yeah.
Lefty was such an influence, he loved Lefty Frizzell too. And I could feel that influence on Saginaw.
yeah.
I mean, he picked up on that.
The one song off that project, I guess that probably brought my attention much of the time. I mean, I know how Echo Mountain come about. I remember when his daughter Shelby found the song. I was there. But the one thing that comes to my mind was when he cut She Took His Breath Away.
Oh, yeah.
Ken went out and got Bill Anderson on the phone, and they played that song like that. And the first verse, Bill Anderson started crying. He said, if this song was ever written for anybody to sing, he said, there's the man to sing it. He said, he's bawling his eyes out all the way through this thing. He said, it's just like he's been through every note of it. Okay, and of course, you know, once again, it's just one of them things that James done. There's a guy that sung tenor for a long time for Nothing Fancy, and he loved James, and a lot of you folks in here know who I'm talking about, Gary Ferris. And Gary loved James, and they cut up and kid all the time. Well, we go to all these festivals, and Gary come up to James, he said, "How do you turn that on?" James said, "What? What are you talking about?" He said, "That crying." He said, "Drop dead of a hat right in the middle of your song." He said, "You just turn on the waterworks." I looked over at Gary, I said, "That ain't turning on." I said, "I wish you could spend about 2 seconds in that man's mind." And then again, I looked at Gary, I said, "Maybe you don't." I said, "You know, maybe." Gary said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Hey," I said, "there ain't a person in this world could wrap herself around something no quicker than him." I said, "He's the most emotional person I've ever been around." And I said, "People get to know him." I said, "I've had people come up to the record table and said, 'Is he really that much of an emotional wreck? Is he got that? Is he troubled like that?' I said, 'He ain't troubled.' I said, 'It's just him.' I said, 'That's the way he sings a song.' And I said, he lived every word he ever sung."
That's
And
the
I
way
said,
James lived.
I mean, you know, if it's something happy, you could see it. We would do, like I don't do floors anymore, and he'd come everything short to dancing on stage like that. And then when he sang Bed by the Window, or she took his breath away, he'd come short to die. You know, that was just James. I never seen nobody that was emotional like him.
But he was like that in I worked for him for a short time, and the first day I worked for him, I was fired 3 times.
It
all-
seemed like when he sang a song, Tom, but it was like the first time he'd ever sung.
Yeah.
Was going through that for the first time, and he probably sung some of them 10,000 times.
But James would fire you, and 2 minutes later, he would be crying. Absolutely crying, apologizing for what he said or done.
Yeah, exactly.
It was forgotten about.
I think, well, Kevin probably no doubt experienced that. James he would be trying to talk me into doing something that I really didn't want to do. And there you go. And I'd go, "James, I don't think we ought to do it that, or, you know, usually it was playing some gigs together, do it this way." And then he'd always go, "Oh, no, come on, you stick with me now." You know? You love me, don't you? And that's the way he was, you know? And at that moment, I don't want to say anything negative.
But he was a master manipulator.
We had.
Yeah, you ought to know that good as anybody.
I go a little further. James and I had sort of like a love-hate relationship. He'd get mad at me and he'd say something and storm off, and I wouldn't hear from him for 2 to 3 months. Then he'd call up, and I'd say, "I ain't answering the phone. He made me madder than hell." You know? And then I'd feel bad calling him up. Before you know it, we're both saying, "Love you."
Yeah.
And that's how we did. It was like the weirdest thing. But what I'm saying is, like his singing, James treated people like that. What was going on in his mind that way was it, and there was no change in him. And he had an idea, and he knew it was going to be the thing. He knew it. He felt it. Now that could change in an hour on his own. Once his mind put it all together, he could change it. And some people would get mad and say, "That's not right," or whatever, you know. But truly, James believed it. And I don't think he was the biggest manipulator as he was at that moment. His mind's going 100 miles an hour, and he truly believed it. And he's gonna convince you.
Yeah, well, what about the check we sent you for after your heart surgery?
Oh yeah, I had open heart surgery, and James is sick at this time, and I had nothing. I didn't have insurance or nothing, and people were, God bless everybody, they were taking care of me. And here's James. He didn't have nothing. He's sick. His money's going out the window for medical bills. He's trying to survive. He sends me a check for $50. I wouldn't cash it. I got it to this day in the box at home. That's James. That's what he had to give you. You're exactly right. And he felt it. He'd call my friends to check on him. And that's the way he did. And that was the love-hate relationship, I'd say. Maybe a little strong, but, you know, you get aggravated the more.
That's the one thing you can say, and I mean, just like Danny just said, and this is honestly, I mean, Danny known him, you know, longer than I did, but traveled so much with him, and we got so close and personal with each other. I mean, me and him was just like brothers. And the thing about him, if James loved you, he truly loved you. It didn't make no difference. I mean, like Tom said, you know, he could spout off, he could do anything, you know, and it wouldn't be just seconds later, you know, you could see it. And he always showed you how much he loved you, how much he cared for you. You
I
know,
watched that one get fired. A dozen times a day. And like I said, well, 30 seconds later, they were crying and hugging one another.
Yeah.
Oh, emotional, that was the way to do it.
me and him swung at each other and everything.
Oh,
else.
yeah.
I hit him in the kneecap with a 3/4 ratchet at Alan Mills' house one day. I was working on the bus, and I told him, I said, I'm gonna knock your brains out if you don't get away from me. Alan put him in the car and said, go home, go home. But talk about that kind of relationship, I could give you a real good example of love-hate relationship with him and Ken. He's in the studio working, and Steve will remember this right here. Ken's sitting there at the desk, and he, you know, he's so into what we're doing and pushing James to the limit, you know, and James singing this line and sung it over and over and over. Finally, James got mad, slung the headphones down, come out of the booth like that. You could hear, Ken Irwin, I'm tired of him. He don't sing. But he come out there and Ken says, goodness, let's put on the boxing gloves.
Well, we would sit there and say, is he gonna come in here or is he gonna go outside?
Out that hall, Steve looked at me and said, we got time, said, kick back here. Said, they're gonna be a while.
He would get real, when he get mad at himself.
Yeah.
You know, in there, and he would, you know, and we'd say, come on, James, give us one more. You got it. You know, and he'd get on, you're his brother, you've seen him.
Yeah.
His veins start popping out in his neck, he'd get red, and I thought, man, he's fixing to chew rocks or whatever. Anyway, he would go outside and come back, and just a few minutes later, come back in just like nothing happened. You know, and we would just, and got used to that, so we anticipated that would happen each time. It didn't always happen that way. But anyway, it was a story about Hank.
Yeah, we was working on the 30 years of farming record. And we pulled in up there, I was driving and pulled up to the studio that morning, the bus was sitting there, and James, you know, me, wonder who that is. That's somebody big. Okay, well, we come in through the bottom of the studio, and there's two levels in Hilltop down there, and we had to go up to the top level because we was mixing that day, and Haggard and them was cutting downstairs. Well, immediately, you know, James comes up there and he's all over Steve. Well, who is it down there? Somebody recording? And Steve said, Merle Haggard's got a session down there. James just immediately, you know, and like Steve said, that's the fastest, probably in record history, that James ever moved to get down a flight of stairs. Steve swore that he only hit about 3 of them. So he goes down there and he gets his hat. And
When Burl's just coming out, they ran into each other.
they run into, and James looks at him and says, Burl, it's such an honor to meet you. And he starts shaking his hand and everything. He said, God, I loved your music forever, for years. I just loved you so much. He Stopped Loving Her Today is one of my favorite songs. And Burl just looked at him. And Burl just went ahead and signed the hat. And he said, I appreciate it.
That story will stick around.
Yeah.
Well, I was working on Merle Haggard's record, and we went out to his house a couple of years ago, working on it, and Merle remembered all of that. He remembered that in a positive way. He you know, he knew James was excited to come down the steps, but Merle he commented about that. he said he'll never forget that. That did a lot too, with the fact that it stuck in his mind.
Oh, yeah.
Because that guy's been through a lot of things too. But James was he was amazing. You know, he was just so much fun to be around, and you know, once you got to know him, you'd see these tantrums and the mad things, and then the good things, that he'd be the sweetest person in the world. I mean, he would just do anything in the world for you, and would talk about people. He loved this man here.
Yeah.
He loved everybody on this stage, and he was just an amazing individual. I've worked with a lot of artists, but I've never worked with one quite like James. He's in a category.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
what,
And
nearly everybody.
Yes, exactly. And, he called me several times just before he got real sick, and the last time I spent some time with him was at the benefit we had at the, in Nashville that time. And, it was that was such a great night, it was, but he called me and said, well, Merle's coming up to such and such place, I said, well, call, find Ray, get Ray out there, Ray, because he wanted to meet him. I don't know if that ever happened or not. Well, say something to him. But it was, it was just right before he passed. I got to talk to him one more time, and you just kind of sense, every time in the last few years, you knew that could be the last time you speak with Mike. What a precious guy.
Yeah, I know.
One of my favorite things in dealing with artists and to do anything with being involved with a record company was the fixing up. Some people like to introduce people and say, oh, there are 4 people that are married because I did. I love finding songs and matching them with the singer.
Oh, yeah.
And I never had a relationship in the 45, 46 years like I did with James. It was just, finding that song, and we did it, a number of times. And when things were really happening and it hit the right song, James would call up. Sometimes it'd be 11 o'clock, sometimes it'd be midnight. And he'd be calling up and he'd be crying and say, you did it again!
Oh, yeah.
And those were always the ones, you took a breath away. Or,
Yeah, I remember that.
It took a while in Bed by the Window, because the demo had some really weird chords in it. It was more like a pop demo, and it had to be rearranged. But once he got it, and I think I pitched that song for about 10 years to all kinds of people. And James was the one who heard it. And
I'll tell you another good song too that he brought to his attention was Jerusalem Tomorrow.
Yep.
When we were starting to work on that song, well, Adam Haynes was playing fiddle with us, so me and Adam started working on the music together, and Adam come up with all that on the fiddle. I mean, he just basically, Adam was the one arranging the song, and it was pretty neat. Well, we was at James' house at that time, and I'll never forget, we was rehearsing all that stuff for the record. And James, he, in his mind, that song was a recitation, and he was going to do a recitation. Well, that's the funniest thing that you'd ever seen in your life, was James holding that paper, and he's trying to talk through them lines, and he gets so far ahead of us so quick, and I finally looked at him, I said, James, I said, talking on a recitation is just like singing in time. I said, it's line for line. I know. He started, he'd be halfway through it before we could get it. I said, no. I said, you really got to space this out. Take it line by line. And then finally, we had worked on it, and of course he got mad, and he spouted off, and he said, I can't do this, it's stupid, walk off and leave it. Finally, he walked back in there, and I was sitting there playing the very same tune on the guitar, just going through the chords, and he started singing that thing. And he sung 3 lines of it, and Adam Haynes said, should have done it like that 3 hours ago. And he just like it's just a magical thing to him. He hit it just right off. I told him, I said, that's it. He said, Ken will like it. I said, Ken will love that. And he's like, wow, it's a recitation. I said, not for you, it ain't. I said, sing it. And of course, you know how he put all his emotions and everything in, especially the last line, when they're heading toward Jerusalem tomorrow. I mean, when he sings the last line in that song, he looked like he's leading the pack, and they was going. So that's just James. It's just him.
He'd never do it the same way twice, but they'd all have interest in things.
Yeah, but each song that he done, it always had those certain points that you knew. I mean, you knew something was going to come up with him, and you're right. He wouldn't do it the same way, but you just had them little little parts. I mean, to this day, I mean, I've had people come up and ask me, said, you know, talk about singing with him. Now, I know Danny can echo this. One thing about James, and Steve will echo this part, if James King sung a chorus on something, hell, he's hung it that way every time on his course. You never had to worry about him faltering on that part of it. And Danny can tell you, he was so easy to sing with that way.
Yeah, the phrasing
And
made
he
it
really was.
harmony.
It made it a joy to do.
I know, we did some recordings for a mutual friend of ours, Ray Davis, and he had a little studio in his basement. And they were both basically for WAMU radio fundraiser. And the radio station would give them out as pledges if you donated enough money. So James and I, and at the time we recorded probably 50, 60 songs. And most times, we never knew the song. The fellow Ray Davis said, "You two can sing this song." And he just set the words up there. And James would he wouldn't play the guitar, he just started singing. And Ray'd say, "That sounds good." We turned the mic off. And most of them were done with one time around, because he had such a way of just leading you right through the song. As, you know, we did a number of songs like that.
Was he playing air guitar at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Because he
Yeah.
couldn't, when, in the Longview sessions, he usually did, but he couldn't sit still. He
Yeah.
couldn't, you know, he just had to be playing, even though there was nothing in his hands.
That was one of the things, we had just one big mic in the room and maybe two other little mics. Very small little studio, crude recording. And James would keep bumping into everything because we were just in a little circle, and he'd be singing something, and then you'd hear it, boom, and backs right into the mic because he's got his eyes closed. You know? And we said, well, we can overdub that. And the guy didn't like us to overdub anything, so we started over, and I said, "See there? Don't move past that line. Stand right there."
You know, he trusted everybody too, you know, in the studio. Like he never hung over my shoulders when we made the record or nothing. He would go out, or he may not even be there.
Yeah, right, 'cause
And then I'd send him something, or send Ken Wood or whatever. And he'd come in, he'd say what he liked or didn't like about it, but in most cases he trusted everybody's judgment on things.
That was, I always said that was because he knew that his limitation was not engineering.
Right.
His was singing. He was a singer. It was not, he could care less if he had to play the guitar.
Right.
All the time we did shows,
Well-
and he said, "Danny, will you play the rhythm guitar with me?" He just wanted to sing.
Right.
Yeah, we just hand him a mic.
But he'd love to be able to do the hands.
Yeah, oh, he told us, yeah.
Everybody in here that if you truly knew him like that, if you tied James' hands behind his back, he'd never been able to say, "Oh."
You know, the Longview, I mixed one album for Longview, I think Ken remembers which one it was. And we had several attempts to mix it, and so they called me and said, "You take a shot at it." So I said, "Okay." And I think we had James coming in right after
Yeah.
that. So anyway, we mixed the Longview album. J.D. Crowe, he said, "Well, I think that's the way we want it." You know, said, "You know, we have to get some other opinions." So after we messed with it for a while, James comes in a couple of weeks later to work on something. And I guess it's his, we track his record. Well, I gave it to him. He went outside and listened to it. He came back in. He says, "Okay, it's that. I'll sign off on it." I mean, that's as far as he would go. He would have particulars, but but if it wasn't, he'd have said, "Man, I don't know, it's dull," whatever. But he said, "It's there now." So, you know, and I put a smile on my face because I knew that, you know, if he says it's there, then, you know, it's something. He listens to the emotion, the whole deal. You know, it was working. Because we had a little trouble with that one, but we finally got it. But yeah, he was one of those type of people that you know, you always look forward to being around him and you know, recording with him, because he was going to take these songs that Ken found, and Ken, he was such a great searcher of songs. You know, he'd think about James and how James' delivery, how he would deliver it as telling his story. You know, and anyway, he would come in there, and at first, if he struggled through it, it wasn't because he didn't like the song. He was trying to get into it. you know, get into the content of the story. And when he did, you knew it. He would ring the bell there. It was amazing. And honestly, not a whole lot of artists do that.
No.
I mean, they do, but not like James. James became the character. He was the person.
It was not
You know.
just reading the words off the paper. I mean, he lived those words. He truly did.
Well, and the words would not always come off like they were on the paper.
Oh, yeah.
Kim would call me and says, "Now be careful, you know, when you're mixing this, make sure the version's got the right word." And then sure enough, you know, 'cause sometimes he would sing and you know, even if you knew the words, it could go right by you because it'd be James' interpretation.
Yeah.
But obviously we had to be careful because we had writers involved and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So, but he would always warn me, said, "Listen to the words." And, you know, I'd have lyrics there and said that make sure that, you know, if it's not borrowed from another tape or something, you know, the right word, and we would. And we maybe forgot a couple of times, you know. But
He sung that last verse on Sweeter Than the Flowers, and he never sung that verse in his life. He never heard it, you know, because the way
Yeah, that's why we decided to pick it.
Yeah,
I think it was from James and Martha Carson.
Yeah,
right.
I said, hey, that'll make it different, because I used to try to steer him away from Stanley stuff. So James, you have your own repertoire. There was one Carter Stanley, and he was incredible. You're incredible too, but you have to have your own songs.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that was one that I pitched that
Yeah.
was a Stanley, but it had the additional verse. So I figured I'd give him a, you know, one that he could do.
Right.
The day we went in and started cutting that song, Ken come to me and he said, I want you to use the mandolin on this song. And he said, I still want you to go back and put a guitar track on it, but he said, I only want you to just roll the guitar through the track. He said, there'll be no guitar break on it. He said, all the breaks will be the mandolin. So it was totally different, you know, from what I expected, you know, at the time, and which was neat because I understood, you know, what he was wanting out of the song. But James sung in the first two verses, and I mean, I honestly knew I wasn't gonna have much trouble with it, because once again, there, me and him both grew up, you know, under Stanley sound, and when we get that last verse, and he's looking at them words, and he's singing it. No wonder Carter didn't sing this, it don't make no sense. I said, James, the verse does make sense. I said, you know, I said the boy is trying to figure out how he's going to go on, you know, with his mama gone like, yeah, Carter never sung this. I said, I never heard Stanleys do this in my life. And Ken, you know, kept telling him, said, well, we got to get away from that image. We got to get away from that, you know, and we got to. It just don't make no sense to me, you know, and it just.
that's how deep he got into it.
You know, he'd sing it, and he, you know, Steve say, let's take another shot at it, you know, and he'd think about it for a little bit. Of course, me and Steve shared this when we first come in the room. We was working on the 30 Years of Farming record, and Ray Deaton come in, and he was kind of helped produce somewhat on the project and everything, and he'd worked with us some on the vocal side especially, and he worked with all those because we had done a quartet thing on 30 Years of Farming and this and that toward the end. Well, James was in there, and he would sing a little bit, and his voice would get a little raspy on him. So Ray Deaton come up, you know, he said, James said, what you need to do? He said, we need to run downtown and get you some Lay's potato chips and some bananas. And he said, Russell,
Lay's original.
yeah, the original.
The others don't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, he said, we're gonna go downtown and get you that. He said, really help me. He said, Russell uses this stuff all the time, man, when he's in the studio. And to this day, Steve Chandler can tell you, I never seen so many banana holes and potato chip bags in one booth in my life. He had stuff scattered on, and them banana holes were hanging off that music stand.
He would sit there, he would eat a banana and then try to sing, and the first little sign of a rasp, he'd grab another banana. It got scary, actually. He ate too many bananas.
We went out on the road and said, you think that stuff works when we're out here like that? I said, well, I'll tell you what, I said, if you go overboard with it on stage like we did in the studio, I said, they'll laugh us off there. I said,
You guys want to sing a couple?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great.